Now that we've converted this general form equation into our standard form, we can then take a look at finding the center, the equation for the transverse axis, the coordinates of our conjugate and transverse axis vertices, the coordinates of our foci, and the equation for our asymptotes. So because this hyperbola has the x quantity as the leading quantity of our difference, this tells us that we have a horizontal hyperbola. It's horizontal, which means the transverse axis is going to be parallel to the x-axis. So what is the center of this hyperbola? Well, the x-coordinate is +1. The y-coordinate is -1. So remember, when finding the center, you take the opposites of these values. So the transverse axis is going to be horizontal to the x-axis, and it's going to go through the center. So if you were to consider where the center is, so it's going to be somewhere over here at like 1, -1 here. So the transverse axis is going to be some horizontal line that passes through this. Well, that's going to be the equation y equals -1, because we know that horizontal lines have an equation of y equals. So y equals -1. Again, it's parallel to the x-axis. The transverse axis vertices are going to lie on this horizontal line. So I guess I can just draw it here. So it's going to be something like this. The transverse axis vertices are going to lie on here, and they're going to be a units away from our center. So we have to figure out what is A, B, and C. So A, B, and C. So remember, A is just the square root of this. This value is A squared. This value is B squared. So A is the square root of 1, which is just 1. B is the square root of 1, again, which is 1. And to find C, we could use the relationship between A, B, and C. So we know that for the hyperbola, there's the relationship of A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So that means that if we substitute these in, we get 1 plus 1, because 1 squared is 1, 1 squared is 1, equals C squared. So that means that C squared is equal to 2, and C then is the square root of 2. So to find the equations of our transverse axis, we're just going to be moving 1 unit to the right and 1 unit to the left of our center. So if I move 1 unit to the right, this point here, this is my transverse axis vertex, is going to be at 2, -1. 2, -1. And again, we're just moving horizontally 1 unit, so that's changing the x value. If I move left 1 unit, that's subtracting 1 unit from my x value, so I'm going to be at 0, -1. And those are the transverse axis vertices. For my conjugate axis vertices, I'm going to be moving up and down 1 unit. So from my center, so here's my other vertex. So from my center, I'm going to be moving up 1 unit. So that's going to put me here. And that's a change vertically in the y. So you're just adding 1 to the y coordinate. So the x coordinate stays the same. So it's 1. And then the y coordinate increases by 1. So it's going to be at 1, 0. And then if I go down 1 unit to get my other conjugate axis vertex, that puts me here. That's going to be subtracting 1 value from my y coordinate. The x coordinate stays the same, so it's going to be 1, -2. So those are the coordinates of my conjugate axis vertices. Now my foci is going to the foci are going to be on the transverse axis, and they're going to be the value of C units to the right and left of our center. Now the square root of 2 is a little bit more than the square root of 1, so which is just 1. So that's a little bit more than 1, so it's somewhere here and somewhere here. Those are going to be my foci. So really we're just taking the x coordinate and adding 1 to it, and then taking the x coordinate and subtracting 1 from it. So if I just take 1, sorry, we're not adding 1, we're adding the square root of 2, we're adding the value of C. So it's 1 plus the square root of 2, and then my y coordinate stays the same because we didn't change y's at all. And then if I subtract the square root of 2 from my x coordinate, 1 minus the square root of 2, that's going to give us our 2 foci. Now, because this is a horizontal hyperbola, the equations for the asymptotes are y minus k equals plus or minus the b value divided by the a value times the quantity x minus h. So we can just substitute in these values that we know, where k is just the y coordinate of the center, h is the x coordinate of the center, and then b and a are the values that we get from here. So in doing that, we get y minus a negative 1, so that's going to be y plus 1 equals plus or minus b divided by a, so 1 divided by 1 is just 1, times the quantity of x minus the x coordinate, so x minus 1. So this equation here is going to be the equation of the two asymptotes. So we have one that has a positive slope and one that has a negative slope.